Hello, welcome to another episode of Voices from the Regions. I'm Ryan Macasero. On July 31, controversial film made in Malacanang falsely depicted the Carmelite nuns of Cebu as playing mahjong with then presidential candidate Cory Aquino here in Cebu. That triggered strong reactions from Cebuanos who've known the Carmelites in Mabolo, Cebu City for years. Here to talk about what actually happened is Carlo Mongaya, an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Departamento ng Filipino at Panitikan ng Pilipinas. He researches and writes on Philippine culture and history and is a native of Cebu City. Thank you for joining us, Carlo.
My adlaw, Ryan, thank you for giving me time and space in your program.
Salamat po sa pagtambong. Let's just get straight into it. So, just to get right to the point, was Cory Aquino playing mahjong with the Carmelites in 1986 on the eve of the EDSA revolution? What do the records say?
No. Then Corazon Aquino, then the candidate, for president, he faced off with Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in the snap elections of 1986. She did not play mahjong with the Carmelite sisters. She was in Cebu on February 22, 1986, because there was a opposition rally at the Fuente Osmeña during that day, and he spoke to a crowd of tens of thousands of Cebuanos. But then her camp, the opposition, heard that there were military intelligence agents that were tailing her, and they feared that there is a shoot-to-kill order against Aquino. So that's why that night they whisked her away to an undisclosed location. Newspapers during that time said that the headline said Cory was safe at a Cebu house. They did not disclose where that place is, but eventually later we all know that she was sleeping in the Carmelite monastery in Lahug. So there in with the Carmelites, they did not play mahjong. She was tired from all the going around the city to hide from state agents, and she just used the opportunity to stay there, to rest. So essentially nagpahuway ra si former president Corazon Aquino. At that time she was not a president sa Carmelite monastery. The next day nag-convoy sila going to the Mactan International Airport, and she went back to Manila.
So the time that she was here, what was the mood in Cebu at that time? What the people, you said the people were out participating in civil disobedience events and rallies.
Yeah, well, if we could recall, martial law in 1972 was declared by Ferdinand Marcos Sr. supposedly to recast society as a quote-unquote new society, composed of disciplined citizens that were dutifully obeying authorities, and then in order to counter the supposed communist threat of the Communist Party, the New People's Army, the National Democratic Front. So that's how martial law was sold to our countrymen and even to Cebuanos. But so from 1972 for around a decade, it was relatively peace and quiet in most parts of the country, including in Cebu. But far from instituting wealth distribution that favored marginalized sectors, and creating this new society, the Marcos dictatorship implemented policies that were really detrimental to the have-nots, while repressing avenues for free expression and protest. That's why by the time around 1980s, 1985, 1986, even Cebu became one of the centers of protests in the country. no. So very no, from since around 1978, when opposition lawmakers in Cebu won the election, no, the IBP elections in 1978 up to 1986, no, Cebu
Mm.
was a center of protest action.
Mm. And I know there were several Cebuano leaders who were also jailed. I think at the time of martial law, can you talk about who these leaders were and what their role was in protesting or resistance against martial law?
Well, no, when martial law was declared, um, Cebu was already a center protest. No, we remember 1960s. This was the time of youth unrest all over the country. So, in the first 3 months of the year 1970, there was the so-called first quarter storm. No, where thousands of youths protested. February 1971, there was the Diliman Commune, and Cebu was not immune, no, was not separate from that kind of protest atmosphere. So when martial law was declared, several local protest leaders and journalists and even politicians were imprisoned. No, notably the Osmeñas, no, the Osmeña patriarch, si Sir Hing, no, Osmeña was in the US. No, he was recuperating from his injuries during the August 1971 Plaza Miranda bombing. He couldn't come back. No, ang mga uban ng mga Osmeñas, no, they were imprisoned, no, sila Sergio Osmeña and so on. And kining mga protest leaders, no, many would become notable in their own fields, like Judge Menmen Paredes, no,
Mm.
and young journalists at that time. We know now national artist for literature, no, si Rizal Mujares, no, he was teaching at San Carlos, and he also wrote for the Freeman. Was also imprisoned, no. And Liberal Party stalwart si Attorney Democrito Barcenas, no, he was the vice mayor of Karkar, no, but he was also imprisoned, no. But from 1972 onward, no, these were some of the people, no, who were imprisoned, because nationwide there were around 70,000 according to the Amnesty International who were imprisoned. But 1972 onward, relatively quiet, no, yung Cebu, no, because of the repression, no, all of the opposition candidates were associated with the Osmeñas, no, baliktad na, no, at the time, including si Osmundo Rama, no,
Mm.
during the previous election, he was with the Osmeña, but 1972, no, he changed camp, no, because in order to retain his position, although in 1975 he was replaced by Gulyas as governor, no, so from 1972 onward, it was relatively quiet, no protest in Cebu. But by 1978, something unexpected happened in Cebu, no, because this was the elections of the ano yan, yung the IBP elections, no, and this was the parliament that was supposed to be dominated by Marcos. He fielded these candidates, the Kilusang under the party, the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan, no, or the KB L. But in Cebu, no, what happened there, no, was that the candidates of the opposition, there was this ragtag party called the Pushon Bisaya. No, they got 13 seats. No, so they got majority in the Cebu IBP, or the interim Batasang Pambansa. No, that was on April 7, 1978. No, so from then on, no, Cebu would be known, no, in politics, no, as one of the bailiwicks, no, of the opposition, no. And aside from traditional politics, so electoral politics, nagsugod na sa tuog ulbo ang protest movement in Cebu. No, it started with the urban poor because there were demolitions dira sa Alaska Mambaling, sa Baragulus, no, sa North Reclamation area, and the urban poor, no, informal settlers, they organized themselves to oppose, no, yung demolition. Crucial diri ang role, no, of the church also, no, yung community organizing of the church in empowering kining mga marginalized sectors, the urban poor, they created the organization kining panaghugpong sa mga kabus nga taga-dakbayan or panaghugpong. No, another area, no, that saw the rise of protest movement in Cebu is the students, no, because before martial law was declared, the universities and colleges were a hotbed of protest. So, University of San Carlos, at that time, the Colegio de San Jose Recoletos, Southwestern University, Cebu Institute of Technology, karon CITU na, no, and so on. No? During this time, when martial law was declared, giban ang mga student councils and student publications. So that was why the students were calling for the revival of this. They called it the democratic reform movement. At the same time, they were also opposing increases in tuition. So that was the yung kumbaga the one of the important sectors that led to the revival of the protest movement. Ang pinakaunang boycott happened in 1981 in the University of San Carlos. Another turning point also in the same year that Ninoy Aquino was killed. No, a few months earlier, in March 1983, there was one student leader, Bashir Majid. No, he was leading protests against tuition hikes in the SWU, and he was killed, no, by security forces. No, he was shot dead. So that was one of the key highlights. So eventually, you'd have more organizations, you'd have more protest leaders, arising, in this in this context. No, so the organized na mga teachers, Alliance of Concerned Teacher, yung Professionals Forum, sila Ma'am Zinaida Uy of the Sasoan, Sociology and Anthropology of sa San Carlos. Later on, you'd also have the yung AMA Sugbo, alyansa sa mga mamumuo sa Sugbo, the local affiliate of the Kilusang Bayo Uno, and yung leader na si Willie Badayos, and even opposition leaders, who were not really from the grassroots, from the marginalized sectors, but the traditional politicians. So they also began to voice out, against Marcos, sila Valentino Legaspi, Antonio Cuenco, Dodong Hulganza, Inday Nita Cortez de Luz. Well, Hulganza was because of his being vocal against the dictator, he was imprisoned during the time. So that was the very explosive atmosphere in Cebu, from around late 1970s up to 1986, which was the culmination. The Cebuanos rallied behind people power.
I imagine si Marcos siguro nakabantay nga na ay growing movement in Cebu at that time. So, unsa yung reaction sa mga growing protest movements here in Cebu? Did he send more military or how did he react?
Well, like in many other places in the country, there were harassment of protest leaders. There were cases of killings, and intimidation of protests. So if you do a quick scan of publications in Cebu, that were published from 1972 to 1986, during the start, kay wala man kay mga protests, so you wouldn't find anything written much about the protest movement, but later on, they could not ignore it already, so they have to publish accounts, about this protest. It's really a common instance, na tanan ng mga protests, gina dispersed violently by at the time the Philippine Constabulary or the PC, mo na Philippine National Police sa karon. Isa sa mga pinaka-violent na case was it happened on May 1984 in the Bisaya na glass company, kay gapiket ang mga workers dito, and that was the first time that tear gas was used against protesters. Another would be in 1984, Marcos called for another election, and the opposition thought that it was rigged. So there was a protest action in Cebu in front of the Cebu provincial capital, and it became a riot. no, and one of the protesters, a 17-year-old youth, Raul Pintoy, was shot dead, no. So it's really repression. Ang pinakasikat na case of extrajudicial killing, or dili pa siya killing, no, but enforced disappearance. So he was abducted by suspected military agents. Muning natabo kay Father Rudy Romano. Father Rudy Romano, he was the head of the CAPP. This is the Coalition Against People's Persecution. He was also the head of the NASUD, no, this is the nagkahiusang subuanon alang sa demokrasya. Eventually these organizations would become the local chapter of the Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, or the Bayan Central Visayas, which we know now is the umbrella group of militant left-wing organizations. So he was the spokesperson of that group. On July 11, 1985, no, he was going to a meeting, but then natinga na lang ang iyang mga ka-meeting that he wasn't around. No? So they looked for him everywhere. After a few days, they held a press conference, and they announced, no, that he was missing. And up to now, he still disappeared. No? So he's a desaparecido. No, his body could not be found anymore. We could not locate him, but of course, no, dugay na kayo, we assume that he is already dead.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really repression.
Mm-hmm. So this Sunday is Ninoy Aquino Day again. So I want to go back to 1983. So after the death of Ninoy, we saw millions of people come out for his funeral in Manila. What was happening in Cebu during that time?
Well, August 21, nahitabo ang assassination ni Ninoy Aquino. No, immediately after the killing of Aquino, no, there was the days after that, there was no immediate protest action, no, in Cebu, August 22, August 23, no, but there were statements issued by several public figures, no. For example, was then a Central Visayas Assemblyman in the IBP, no, si Hilario Davide Jr. He called, no, for the opposition forces to rally, no, and especially he was specifically talking to his fellow opposition members who he thought was still wavering in their stand, no. So he thought na this is the time that we should have a show of force, no. And there were two councilors in the Cebu City Sangguniang Panglungsod who resigned they did not resign from their position as councilor. They resigned from their membership in the KBL, the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan. This was the political party of Marcos. That was si Jose Cuenco, no? He was also the OIC mayor of Cebu City in 1987, no, before na talo siya sa election ni Tami. And no, kining the other kagawad was Pablo Abella, no, kainumdum ko dira sa Happy Valley padung sa Salvador Extension dapit sa Labangon. There is the street named after Pablo Abella, no. So he was a councilor from 1969 to 1987, no, and in 1983, because of the killing of Aquino, no, he resigned from the KBL, no. But from then on, we could see a subterranean change, no, after the killing of Aquino in Cebu, no, because before the killing of Aquino, there was already a growing protest movement, no, but after his death, no, mas nangisog ang mga kining traditional politicians, and kining mga sectors, they were now linking their issues to the national and political stage. Okay, for example, you have students from San Carlos, you have students from UP Cebu, you have students from the Southwestern University. They have protest actions against tuition increase for the revival of student councils. But after the killing of Aquino, it became easier for them to link this to wider issues. No, they thought that the problem that we are encountering in the university is not separate from the authoritarian atmosphere, no, that was engulfing the entirety of Cebu, no, and the Philippine society, no. So September 17, all of these forces coalesced, no, the protest movement, the students, the church, the urban poor, the militant left, and the traditional politicians. They created the Jaja, Justice for Aquino, Justice for All. So September 17 sila nag-press conference here in there in Cebu City, and they organized a very big rally on September 21, no? Also sa katong burial ni Ninoy Aquino, no, on September 2, no, there was also a big prayer rally in Plaza Independencia, no,
Mm.
Cebu City. And weekly from then on, no, September 21 up to around December 10, there were weekly jogging protests, no, and other forms of protests, no, in joined by tens of thousands of Cebuanos, no, in Fuente and Plaza Independencia. No? So that
Mm.
was the response, no, of the Cebuanos in to the killing of Ninoy Aquino, which is, it's not really surprising why in 1986, no, they also supported, no, the si Cory, no, and joined the people power against Marcos.
Mm. So after the death of Aquino, you would say that mas naging consistent ang actions in Cebu after, no? But I wanted to go back to the nuns for a second. Okay, it's a story that's told locally, but not really about their decision to allow Cory to stay there the night, but not really something that is discussed on nationwide. Um, would you say that the nuns is the decision of the Carmelite nuns to allow uh, then presidential candidate Cory Aquino to stay with them in the monastery, was it a significant moment for you from a historical perspective?
Yeah, it's a really significant historical moment, no? Because you have here the religious community, no, intervening, no, in a political, very critical, no, na political situation, no. So yeah, that was a really important, no, and it showed the unity of different sectors, no, from the church hierarchy. You have the traditional politicians who were fed up, no, of the dictatorship, no, and then you also have the students who were boycotting their classes, no, and you have the urban poor, you have the workers, no, and ordinary people, no. Everyone at that time, no, was thinking that more than a decade of dictatorial rule was enough, no, and that form of support, no, it was an expression of that collective sentiment that was then being shared, no, by various Filipinos, including Cebuanos at the time.
Mm. Kung para sa mga wala nakaibaw na, then the Carmelite nuns are cloistered and they don't just let anybody go back
Yes.
there. So it was a very conscious decision to allow Cory and her daughter Chris at the time to stay there that night, no? Um, so with the reactions of that scene, when it went online, what did you how did you react to that when you saw that that clip of the actress playing Cory and then telling that person on the phone get them out of the Philippines while the nuns are playing mahjong on the table.
Well, I thought it was really disrespectful, no, and even our leaders, no, politicians, no, who are in fact allied, no, with the current administration. No, I think they share the same sentiment. No, it's not just because you know, this is your candidate that you support, no, that you are given the right, no, to take liberties with the truth, no, and with historical facts, no. So it's really the disrespectful is one thing that you campaign for a candidate, no, you'd like to tell things about that candidate, no, or about their side of the story. It's another thing, no, to distort history, no, and to disrespect, no, people there, no. And pananap ako sa Cebu, no, we just go to the Carmelites, no, to like offer eggs, di ba, para di maguna ng imong mga event, no? And then here they are, no, all of a sudden, no, they're accused, no, of being evil conspirators, no, playing mahjong, no, very um very unbelievable, no, for me.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Um, so after she left the Carmelite monastery, she went back to Manila. Of course, we all know what happened on EDSA then. Um, how did this opposition heritage shape Cebu post EDSA? I know the Marcoses never really in the 90s were not very popular in Cebu at the time. How did it shape local politics?
Well, no, for a time, no, allies, no, that of the Aquino administration, no, and not just allies, no, but the entire political establishment, no, would use the people power image, no, as a form of legitimization, no, for their continued hegemony, no. So
Mm.
that's the one thing. No, it's not just in no, in Cebu, no, but siguro, no, in the last few years, no, because nakita man nato, no, that while people power, it overthrew a dictator, and for over 2 decades, no, people were fed up of that kind of style of rule, no. But we also see today that not much has changed, no, in the lives of ordinary people, no, from 1986 when the dictator was overthrown, no, up to now, no, 2022, no. That's a very long time, no. So perhaps, no, that could be an explanation, no, for the well, no, the weakening, no, of the never again, no, and never forget narrative, no. On the other hand, we also have to admit, no, yung certain weaknesses, no, by the post Aquino administration. I mean, post Marcos administrations, no, especially by the Cory Aquino, no, in instituting educational measures, no, and other reforms, no, that would ensure that the evils of authoritarianism, no, would not go unforgotten, no, and that there could be checks and balances to prevent their return.
Mm-mm. And I know you wrote a piece about this for Rappler before about Cebu's history of being an opposition bailiwick, but in the last elections, we saw that for many of us caught a lot of people by surprise that Bongbong Marcos actually won in Cebu by a landslide, which was opposite of how he performed in 2016 during the vice presidential elections. How did you look at that? What when you saw the results where
Or,
Cebu, this province that was traditionally known as opposition, went overwhelmingly for the son of the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos.
well, actually, I was not surprised, no, because during the election time, the administration candidate, the local slate, the of Garcia, they carried Bongbong Marcos for president, and then the other side is Duran also carried Bongbong Marcos, no, and you could see that, no, in the slates, no, of the local politicians, no, local politics, no, that most of the traditional politicians, no, they back, no, the bandwagon of the current president Bongbong Marcos Jr. No, so I was not surprised, no. In fact, if you check out, no, yung trends, no, in 2019, no, here I was a bit surprised, no. um Jaime Marcos was able to get in the magic 12, no, for senators, no, in the province of Cebu. No, she was number 10. No, she had like 180,000 something. I could check it again later. She was followed by Lito Lapid, and the last was Bam Aquino with around 160,000 votes. No, so from there, no, we already see, no, yung the trend, no. But how do we explain this? No, well, I've talked earlier, no, about disillusionment with the people power narrative, no. But at the same time, no, I've also talked about all of the local politicians siding with the bandwagon of the Bongbong Sara, no. So let's just say that in 1969, there was the presidential elections, no, when Sergio Osmeña Jr. he ran against Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and Marcos overwhelmingly won. No, and kining si Marcos, he also ensured that he will win in Cebu, no, which is the bailiwick of the Osmeñas. No, that's why in the when Bongbong went to the I think it was the inauguration of Gwen Garcia, nagpasalamat siya. He said that ano no, this is very big thing to him, no, because this was the first time after a very long time nagdaog yung Marcos brand again, no, in Cebu. No, that was in 1969. Napildi si Sergio Osmeña Jr. by a very large margin. Yeah, explanation na to ni Sergio Osmeña Jr. Ano siya, we were outgunned, we were outgunned, we were
Mm.
outgunned. No, and perhaps no, in the recent na setting, no, we could say the same thing. No, you have the machinery, you have the infrastructure of network disinformation. You have all of the traditional politicians lining up with the administration ticket, and that was really the formula, no, for a big success, no, even in Cebu, which was formerly an opposition bailiwick.
Mm-mm. So would you say Cebu has forgotten about its history as an as a province resistant to authoritarianism?
Well, I think it's not just Cebu, no, but
Mm.
our nation, no, as a whole. No, I think it's a failure, no, of our educators, no, our historians, no, in really propagating, no, and popularizing, no, our history, no. Kay, well, now, no, how do we think of history? No, we just say na chismis lang ng history, no. So we don't really take it seriously as a people, no. So I think it's not just in na sa Cebu na forgotten, no, but it's really a challenge. So it's a question that should be posed, no, to all of us, no, as Filipinos, no. But at the same time, we could see, no, in the past campaign, no, that's electoral campaign, and even after it, no, you have this group of young students, university educated. You could say they were activists, no, or they are advocates of rights, no. They are disparaged as the woke, no, the millennials, the Gen Z, no, mga sige lang reklamo, no, but they are interested, no. They were really awakened, no, by recent events, no, the Tokhang, the return of authoritarianism. They are trying to make sense of our history and making a stand, no, about how our country, no, should proceed in the future. I mean, I think this woke youth, no, our future, no, as a country lies with them, and this is not just in the Philippines in general, no, but I because I go to Cebu time to time, no, even Cebuano, no, students, no, the woke young activists there, no, they're really concerned, no. So even after the elections, no, yung isa sa ilang mga effort was to try to digitize the archives, no, of these martial law historical documents and old newspapers, no? So there are these efforts, and we could see that in this moment you have on the one hand these young activists who are awakening in the authoritarianism 2.0 in the present, and at the same time they are looking for lessons, they are looking for wisdom, and they were able to find it by talking to the old veterans, no, of the martial law period, no. I remember in Cebu, no, there are discussions, there are fora organized by the um, Karma, no, this the coalition against the return of the Marcoses in the Malacanang, and these were the old activists of their time, no, sila Judge Menmen Paredes, Attorney Democrito Barcenas. By the way, they are now trying to come up with an anthology of martial law narratives in Cebu, no. So I'm excited to get a copy of that book because they're gonna launch it on September 21, no, 2022. So you have here that veterans of the martial law struggle meeting up with these young activists, no, and I think that's a good start, no, and from there, no, challenge no, the next generations how to really stand for the truth, for historical veracity, no, and to propagate, no, that history, no, to a wider mass of people.
Mm-mm. Okay. And just to wrap this up, so we're in the first year of the administration of the son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos. What are the lessons the youth today, whether they're activist students or whatever, can take away from the experience of the youth then from the time of martial law? What can they take away from that? And what wisdom can they, I guess, get from it in what they're trying to advocate for and what they're standing for today?
Well, no, during the martial law time, one of the, because I've interviewed, no, some of these veterans of the martial law struggle. They were still young in the 1970s and 1980s. No, one of their favorite slogans, no, that they really shout, no, in the streets, no, is this, no, ingon sila, makibisog ayaw ka hadlok, no, do not be afraid, no, dare to struggle, no, and I think that is one of the key principles, no, that we should hold on to, no, today, because during their time, no, you really have to have the courage, no, the audacity, no, to try to change things, no, because that was under a dictatorship. No, if you're there are just three people walking together in the street, no, you could be accosted by the police, no, because you might be meeting and planning something subversive. No, if you have a copy of certain books, of certain publications, newspapers, or if you just wrote a placard that says we don't like this rule, no, or this policy by the dictator, no, you could be imprisoned, no? So under authoritarian circumstances, no, you really need a certain level of courage and audacity, no, to confront your fear, no, and to stand, no, for what is true, to stand for what is just, to stand for what is right, no. Another thing would be this is also the story of the protest movement in Cebu, is the need to build unities, no. The protest movement in Cebu after the Marcos martial law was declared, no, began with the urban poor, the basic Christian communities organized by the church, no, and the student movement, no, but eventually they had to build unities, no, across issues faced by different sectors, no, because they are facing one situation, no, which is an authoritarian situation, and the specific problems faced by university students. They had high tuition. There was no student council. They were being repressed inside the classroom. The urban poor were being demolished. No, the majority of workers, no, their wages were being cut off. No, that is can be linked, no, to the entirety, no, the totality of an authoritarian regime, no. So that's one of their lessons at that time, no, that they started to build unity, no, and linkages, no, between different movements, no. So katong gibuhat nila Father Rudy Romano, they had the CAPP, the Coalition Against People's Persecution. Eventually it became it became the Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, Central Visayas, no, and it's not just within the protest movement, no, but they also sought the active support, no, of traditional elites, no, and the traditional politicians who were being disenfranchised, no, by the dictatorship, no. So they built a broad front, no, broad united front, no, and eventually this front was strong enough to be able to overcome the repression of the Marcos dictatorship, and that was the culmination, the people power. But then after people power, I think medyo siguro the past generations they thought na daog na ba, no, so
Mm.
medyo naging comfortable, no, naging complacent, no. So that's the last lesson, no, that I think is very important, that just because we were able to achieve certain things. At the time, we were able to overthrow a very abusive, a corrupt dictator. But we shouldn't settle for that. No, the fight for social justice, for social transformation, is a constant na challenge for everyone. It does not stop. So I think that's it.
Mm-mm. So facing repression with courage, building unities, and never being complacent. No, we've been speaking to University of the Philippines Assistant Professor Carlo Mangaya on not only the truth about Cory, Nuns, and mahjong, but Cebu's place during the martial law period. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. You've been watching Voices from the Regions.
Daghang salamat sa inyo.